Good morning, you're watching Daybreak live on A News, and I'm here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at your headlines. Mourners gather in Lebanon to bury victims of the deadliest Israeli strike since the ceasefire began. That killed 14 people this week. The United States is set to deploy an additional 5,000 troops to Poland. And at least 25 people have been killed in 2 attacks in northern Honduras. First this morning, Lebanese officials say at least 14 people were killed in Israeli airstrikes on southern Lebanon this week, as mourners gathered on Thursday to bury victims at one of the deadliest recent attacks. Now, the UN is also reporting a sharp rise in settler violence in the occupied territories. Let's go to this report.
Tensions remained high after Lebanese health officials reported 14 people were killed on Tuesday in Israeli airstrikes in southern Lebanon, with a health centre also destroyed in Mashouk. The health ministry said the dead in Deir Kanun and Nahar included 4 children and 3 women. On Thursday, mourners gathered to bury the victims of what was described as the deadliest single bombing raid in Lebanon in recent weeks. Dozens attended funerals in the southern town as rescue workers continued searching through the rubble.
We heard about the airstrike and immediately began working to evacuate the wounded and the martyrs. Today, we came to continue searching for the missing. There are 2 or 3 people still missing. The casualties here are 5 children and 3 women. There are many body parts, and their families will identify them through DNA testing.
Following attack, Israel's military said that it had targeted more than 25 sites of Hezbollah infrastructure in southern Lebanon. The attacks came despite a 45-day ceasefire extension announced by the US State Department on May 16th, worsening the humanitarian crisis amid rising casualties and displacement. Fighting has continued despite a US-brokered ceasefire, with each side accusing the other of truce violations. The United Nations also said on Thursday that Israeli settlers carried out at least 49 attacks between May 12th and May 18th.
In just 1 week, between the 12th and the 18th of May, OCHA documented at least 49 attacks by Israeli settlers that caused casualties or damage, including a rise in arson attacks against homes, farmland, vehicles, and a mosque. With this, over 870 settler attacks across more than 220 communities have caused casualties or property damage this year alone.
The ongoing war between Israel and Lebanese armed group Hezbollah is expected to shrink Lebanon's economy by at least 7% this year and could cost the country an estimated $20 billion. According to the Lebanese health ministry, more than 3,070 people have been killed in Israeli strikes on Lebanon since March 2nd, when Hezbollah fired on Israel, triggering a new war.
Now let's take a look at the story shaping the day across the globe, and we head first over to Al Jazeera and their headline in regards to what's taking place over in Honduras. At least 16 people killed in 2 attacks in northern Honduras. Now, there have been 2 incidences of gun violence killing 16 people, as the headline just mentions, in Central America. Now, on Thursday, gunfire was first reported on a remote palm farm in the Honduras area, and a spokesperson for Honduras National Police said that as many as 10 workers were shot dead at the site, though the number is expected to rise. So this has just recently happened, so we're getting reports coming in. Local media indicated that armed suspects fired indiscriminately on labourers, including some who had gathered at a local church. Now, there is no particular motive that has been identified in the attack, but northern Honduras has been seen as the site for ongoing agrarian conflict for years, and human rights experts warn that local farmers and workers have been forced off their land by armed actors seeking control of fertile territory. So this, as I mentioned, is one of the leading headlines on Al Jazeera and a number of other outlets throughout the day. Okay, now let's go to the next headline this morning, and that's on Deutsche Welle's website. That's in relation to the US. The US is to send 5,000 additional troops to Poland. Now, what we know is that President Donald Trump has said that the US will now send over these troops. It comes a week after the Pentagon has actually cancelled a planned deployment of 4,000 troops to the country. Now, President Donald Trump wrote on Truth Social, his own social media website, saying the decision was based on the US's relationship with the Polish president. The US president also did not provide any further details onto whether the additional troops were part of the previous planned deployment or a different operation as well in regards to this. Now, the White House has signaled in recent weeks that it intends to reduce its overall troop levels in Europe as part of its America First agenda. And earlier this month, the US announced that it would actually withdraw 5,000 troops. If you remember me also describing this on the press page, to find out that the US was going to withdraw 5,000 troops from Germany after a row erupted between Trump and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz over the war with Iran. Now, just to add, it's still unclear whether the additional troops for Poland were part of those withdrawing from Germany and basically moving over to Poland, or a separate group entirely. But we'll get more information, and once we do, we'll make sure that we update you with the latest. But for now, we do know that 5,000 troops, additional troops, will be deployed to Poland, and more information will come out shortly. Okay, let's go to our next headline this morning, and that's on the BBC website, and that's in regards to Cuba, because Marco Rubio, who is the US state minister, Rubio says Cuba is a threat to the US as Havana accuses him of lies. Now, the comments come a day after the US charged Cuba's former president, Raul Castro, with murder over the 1996 downing of 2 planes, resulting in the killing of US nationals. Now, Rubio said that Washington's preference was a diplomatic solution, but warned that President Donald Trump had the right and obligation to protect his country against any threat. Now, Cuba's foreign minister has spoken out, Bruno Rodriguez, and accused Rubio of lies and said the island had never posed a threat to the US. He spoke to reporters on Thursday, and Rubio spoke to reporters on Thursday and accused Cuba of being one of the leading sponsors of terrorism in the entire region, which Rodriguez has vehemently denied in a post on X. Now, the Cuban foreign minister criticized Rubio for trying to instigate a military aggression attempt and accused the US government of ruthlessly and systematically attacking the country. And just as a reminder, Cuba is still suffering from a fuel crisis, which has been exacerbated by an effective US oil blockade. The US has stopped imports over into Cuba once and told other countries, surrounding countries like Venezuela, Mexico, and other Caribbean islands, putting pressure on them not to actually provide them with oil. Now, while under pressure, the Trump administration is trying to make a deal with Cuba, and experts say that there are 3 ways the Cuba crisis could play out. One of them being that the US could actually seize Raul Castro, as the indictment says, of the charges, and charge him for that particular murder in 1996, the downing of a plane where 3 US nationals were unfortunately killed. Or the US could seek Havana leadership change, which is something the US has been pressing for a number of years anyway. And the third thing is that Cuba could actually collapse. A third possibility is that Cuba buckles under the weight of a massive economic pressure it is facing, which has already led to hours long of delays, of blackouts and food shortages on the island. So we know that Cuba is very much in a pressure cooker, it seems, especially because they don't have any oil coming through to the island as much as it used to because of the pressures and the sanctions that the US has provided. So whether or not the US is going to take it in this route or that route is still yet to be decided, but we are paying close attention, especially now with the charges over Raul Castro, the previous leader, and now Rubio saying that Havana is currently a threat in the region to the US. So we'll definitely provide you with more information as we get it throughout the course of the coming days. Okay, now let's move over to our next headline, and that will be in relation to what's happening in Peru. And I actually have a video to show you, which will come up very shortly. Here we are. Peru has actually incinerated more than 11 tons of drugs seized from organised crime on Thursday, as you can see here, putting it into an incinerator. And everything that you can see in those white bags is related to drugs. Now, the ceremony was held in Lima, and according to figures shared by the anti-drug police at the ceremony, security forces destroyed 272 clandestine drug laboratories and dismantled 52 criminal organizations so far in 2026. Now, as you can see, all bags and bags, rows and rows, shelves of all these drugs that will now be disintegrated and destroyed. Now, the destroyed substances were confiscated from various locations nationwide, is what we've been told, and collected by the government, and now is being destroyed in Lima, in Peru. There we are. Those are the pictures. Well, thank you so much. That was your morning press headlines for the day. Now I'm going to take a short break. When I return, we'll discuss the rest of the global stories for the morning. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now let's have a look at the global stories for the morning. And the US is increasing its military presence in Poland despite earlier signals of troop reductions in Europe. The announcement comes in the middle of ongoing discussions within NATO over regional security and defense spending. Here's more.
US President Donald Trump has announced that the United States will send an additional 5,000 troops to Poland, days after the Pentagon delayed a previously planned troop deployment to the country. In a post on Truth Social on Thursday, Trump said the decision followed the election of Polish President Karol Nawrocki and highlighted the relationship between the two leaders. The announcement comes as the Trump administration reviews US troop deployments in Europe under its America First policy. Ahead of a NATO meeting in Sweden, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said President Trump was very disappointed with allies for refusing to let the US use their bases during the Iran war.
If all these countries around the world agree with us that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, that this regime is a threat to world peace and security, that already have missiles that can reach Europe, they don't have missiles that can reach America yet, but they have missiles that can reach Europe, we're actually step forward and do something about it, and everyone goes into hiding. Yeah, I think we're very upset about that. The president has made that very clear.
Earlier this month, the Pentagon announced plans to cut the number of US Army Brigade combat teams in Europe from 4 to 3, raising concerns about America's long-term military presence in the region. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth later said the delay in the Poland deployment was temporary and stressed that Washington remains committed to a strong presence there. It is still unclear whether the additional troops announced by Trump are tied to the delayed deployment or will come from other bases in Europe, including Germany, where the US plans to withdraw 5,000 troops. The move comes amid NATO debates over defense spending, with Trump urging European allies to do more for regional security. Poland, one of NATO's top defence spenders, currently hosts about 10,000 US troops as the war in Ukraine continues.
Demonstrators gathered in Greenland's capital as the US opened a larger diplomatic hub in Nuuk. The move comes in the middle of continued tensions over President Donald Trump's ambition for greater influence over the Arctic island.
Several hundred demonstrators protested outside the new US consulate in Nuuk as Washington officially opened its expanded diplomatic mission in Greenland. Crowds waved Greenland's red and white flag and held signs reading "USA, stop it," while chanting "No means no" and "Greenland belongs to the Greenlanders." The new downtown consulate replaces a smaller facility on the outskirts of the capital. A US State Department spokesperson said the site offers greater capacity for diplomatic engagement in Greenland. Greenland Prime Minister Jens Frederik Nielsen and several other local politicians declined invitations to attend the opening.
Over the heads of the Greenlanders, I think it's very colonialist rhetoric about buying this place and putting up hotels, which Trump has shared memes about. I think there has been talk over people's heads, and it's just a really unpleasant reminder of people as commodities or as a product, as something that can be bought and sold. It's very unpleasant to witness, and I think this ruthless rhetoric where military actions are not taken off the table. I also think it's completely wild and ruthless towards the people who live here, towards the children, towards everyone who sees this as their country.
The protest follows continued tensions after President Donald Trump expressed interest in greater US influence over Greenland. Greenland's government has said the island belongs to its people and will never be for sale.
The US has approved a possible potential sale to Ukraine of equipment to sustain the Hawk missile system for an estimated $108 million. The State Department says the proposed sale includes maintenance support, spare parts, repair services, and logistics and engineering assistance for the system. It said on Thursday the package supports US foreign policy and national security objectives by strengthening a partner country in Europe. The deal is designed to improve Ukraine's ability to meet current and future threats and carry out self-defense and regional security missions. A Paris appeals court has found Airbus and Air France guilty of corporate manslaughter over the 2009 Rio-Paris air disaster that killed 228 people. The court imposed the maximum fine of €225,000 on each company. Flight AF447 disappeared over the Atlantic Ocean on June 2009. Investigators said the crew mishandled a problem linked to iced-up sensors, while prosecutors also pointed to failures in training and safety procedures by both companies. The US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the chances of reaching a peaceful agreement with Cuba remain low as Washington increases pressure on Havana. Rubio warned that any attempt by Iran to introduce a tolling system in the Strait of Hormuz would also threaten global trade and ongoing diplomatic talks. Let's take a look at this report.
The president's preference is always a negotiated agreement that's peaceful. That's always our preference. That remains our preference with Cuba. I'm just being honest with you. You know, the likelihood of that happening, given who we're dealing with right now, is not high. But if they have a change of heart, you know, we're here. And in the meantime, we'll keep doing what we need to do.
It sounds $1 million in humanitarian aid yet?
Are we offended that the Cubans have not accepted our $100 million? Well, they say they've accepted it. We'll see if that means it. Because here's the thing. We're not going to do humanitarian aid that falls into the hands of their military company that they have, and then they take that stuff and they sell it at the dollar stores and put the money in their pocket. That's not going to work that way. So I was in Rome. That said, our preference is always a diplomatic solution, always, and you know, a negotiated agreement. That's always our preference. But to answer your question, if there's a threat to the national security of the United States, the president not just has the right, he has the obligation to address that national security threat. All right, let's go. It's the United States' national interest. So the future of Cuba belongs to the people of Cuba in terms of how they're governed, what the system looks like, and so forth. But the national security threat, that's 100% something we're going to focus on because that's about America. All right, last one, guys. They're against it. No one in the world is in favor of a tolling system. It can't happen. It would be unacceptable. It would make a diplomatic deal unfeasible if they were to continue to pursue that. So it's a threat to the world if they were to try to do that. And it's completely illegal, by the way. Well, that wouldn't, first of all, any changes to our posture in NATO would not for me to announce. That's something that the President and the Department of War would do. This is a foreign ministers meeting. We'll talk about some of those issues. I don't think anyone is shocked to know that the United States and the President in particular is very disappointed at NATO right now. The President's he's been very disappointed. Understand that there are many countries in NATO that agree with us that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, that Iran is a threat to the world. So the President said, fine, I'm going to do something about it. He's not asking them to commit troop. He's not asking them to send their fighter jets in, but they refuse to do anything. So I think the President looks at that and says, hold on a second. If all these countries around the world agree with us that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, that this regime is a threat to world peace and security, that already have missiles that can reach Europe. They don't have missiles that can reach America yet, but they have missiles that can reach Europe. We're actually step forward and do something about it, and everyone goes into hiding. Yeah, I think we're very upset about that. The President has made that very clear. I believe the Pakistanis will be traveling to Tehran today, so hopefully that'll advance this further. The President's preference is to do a good deal. That's his preference. It's always been his preference. If we can get a good deal done, that would be great. I'm not here to tell you that it's going to happen for sure, but I'm here to tell you that we're going to do everything we can to see if we can get one. But if we can't get a good deal, the President's been clear. He has other options. I'm not going to elaborate on what those are, but everybody knows what those are. But his preference is always a deal. His preference is always an agreement. His preference is always diplomacy. So let's see if we can get there. there's some good signs, but we understand this. I don't want to be overly optimistic as well. So let's see what happens over the next few days. Of their portfolio, we also think there's opportunities with Venezuelan oil. In fact, it's my understanding that the interim president of Venezuela will be traveling to India next week as well. So there's opportunities. There's a lot to work on with India. They're a great ally, a great partner. We do a lot of good work with them. And so it is an important trip. I'm glad we're able to do it because I think there'll be a lot for us to talk about. And we'll...
Now, turning to the Middle East, and the Board of Peace's envoy for Gaza has warned the UN Security Council that without a lasting ceasefire, the territory risks becoming permanently divided, leaving more than 2 million Palestinians confined to less than half of Gaza. Here's what the Board of Peace director had to say.
Let me briefly speak about what a refusal to accept this roadmap means. If transition and decommissioning are delayed or refused, the Board of Peace will discuss meaningful and practical modalities to advance civilian stabilization, humanitarian relief, and recovery based on the architecture the parties have agreed to when the comprehensive plan was developed, approved by the Arab and Islamic states, and endorsed by the UN Security Council. While the Board of Peace continues its work, I want to be clear about the risks of inaction by the parties. The risk is that the deteriorating status quo becomes permanent. A divided Gaza, Hamas holding military and administrative control over 2 million people across less than half the territory. Those people are likely to remain trapped in the rubble, dependent on aid, with no meaningful reconstruction, because reconstruction financing will not follow where weapons have not been laid down. No investment, no movement, no horizon. And the result? Another generation of children growing up in tents, in fear, with despair as the most rational thing for them to feel. No security for Israel, and no viable pathway to Palestinian self-determination. This is a version of the future that Israelis, Palestinians, and the region should all fear and all mobilize to avoid. And I will say one more hard thing. The discussions have now matured to the point where the core political choices are clear, and further delay will only deepen civilian suffering. The resources are ready to launch this next phase of implementation, and the commitments to disburse as needed are firm. This is not an obstacle. Every day is another day of a child in the tent without a school, a father without work, a family without a better future. That is the price of delay, and it is a price paid in Gaza by Palestinians.
Now, Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić is due in Beijing on Saturday for a 5-day state visit, becoming the latest world leader to arrive in the Chinese capital. Our correspondent Manur Makhdoom has more from Beijing.
Beijing is preparing for another high-profile visit, this time from Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić, who is set to arrive here on Saturday for a 5-day state visit at the invitation of Chinese President Xi Jinping. This will be his first formal state visit to China, and Beijing has been keen to underline just how significant it considers the relationship. Chinese officials describe Serbia as the first European country to build what they call a community with a shared future with China and an important partner in Central and Eastern Europe. Serbia was the first European country to join China's Belt and Road Initiative back in 2015, even while it was actively pursuing EU membership. It's a little-known fact that helps explain why China treats Serbia as such a prized partner on the continent. The visit comes at a notable moment. Just this week, Beijing hosted Russian President Vladimir Putin, and days before that, US President Donald Trump. The fact that Serbian leader is next in line speaks to China's efforts to engage actively across the geopolitical spectrum. On the agenda here are expected to be trade, infrastructure, and investment, including the ongoing Belgrade-Subotica high-speed railway project, as well as overall economic cooperation under the Serbia-China Free Trade Agreement. A News, Beijing.
Staying on China, and China and Russia have strongly criticized the US for bringing murder charges against former Cuban President Raul Castro. Beijing urged Washington to abandon what it called a policy of coercion and threats, while Moscow described the pressure on Havana as approaching violence. The US has accused Castro and 5 others over the 1996 shooting down of 2 aircraft, an accident in which 4 people were killed and which significantly worsened tensions between Washington and Havana. A Cambodian refugee deported from the US to Eswatini says he feared for his life after authorities flew him to the Southern African kingdom and locked him inside a maximum security prison. Here's more.
Eswatini, a small landlocked country in southern Africa, became part of a US deportation program that sent migrants to countries other than their own under special agreements. One of the deportees, Cambodian refugee Peep Rom, spoke about the journey and the conditions he faced after being sent from Louisiana to Eswatini through South Africa.
It was rough. When I went to Africa, it was rough. When I first, like being shackled for 21 hours, from when we landed there, we thought we was gonna get killed. I thought that I was gonna get killed.
After landing, authorities transferred Rom to a maximum security prison, even though he was not accused of committing a crime in Eswatini.
And they threw me in a prison when I got there. When I got there, they put me in a super maximum prison, and that right there, I feel as though that's illegal to put somebody in a prison and you haven't committed any crime in that country.
Lawyers challenging the deportation deal say the migrants were held without proper legal process.
Everything must follow due process, and you expect America to know that as a first world country and as a country that has demonstrated or postures themselves as a beacon of democracy and protection of civil rights and liberties. We'll expect them to know that if a person has finished their sentence and you don't desire them in your own territory, there are diplomatic processes or channels that you can follow. You touch base with their embassy and then you say you want to deport them back to their country. But America doesn't want to do that.
Eswatini's government has not publicly detailed the full terms of its agreement with Washington. Legal challenges against the deportation arrangement are continuing in the country's courts.
Now we're going to take a quick break. When I return, we'll take a closer look at the regional headlines, and I'll be joined by a guest to go through some of those key important stories across the region. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, and thank you for joining me this morning. Now let's turn to some of the stories in the region this morning, and we head first to what's been taking place across the week in Baku, because Baku has been hosting the World Urban Forum. Now we know there's a number of key issues that have come out of those particular sessions throughout the week, but we're going to focus now on what's going on in relation to geopolitical fragmentation, which has been reshaping trade routes and regional alliances, cooperation between Azerbaijan and Georgia, and is gaining renewed international significance, especially off of the back of WUF 13. And it's something that we're now going to discuss in more detail with a special guest, Ambassador Valery Chechek-Lashvili, Georgian Strategic Analysis Center board member in Tbilisi. Welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Good morning. My first question is, as global powers seek alternative transit routes amid ongoing disruptions to traditional supply chains, do you think Baku and Tbilisi are positioning themselves as indispensable partners in the future architecture of Euro-Asia trade, energy, connectivity, and sustainable regional development?
Actually, our two countries, they don't need to position themselves. They're already positioned, because Azerbaijan is the only country from 3 South Caucasian countries which has outreach to Caspian Sea, and same is Georgia, which is only one country with the outreach to Black Sea. So this tandem, Azerbaijan-Georgia, already is positioned as a key component of the middle trade communication transport corridor. And it is significant definitely not only for our two countries, but to the region and beyond. And I see that a recent visit of Georgian delegation confirmed this fact. We enjoy relations of comprehensive strategic partnership, and it was this visit, recent visit of Georgian delegation was another demonstration of this fact, and good and interesting documents were signed. So I think that it was very good development in this sense.
Definitely, having the president there, the Georgian president, with Azerbaijan president coming together and having a number of discussions at WUF and then later on privately shows very much a great partnership between the two countries. But the anticipated return now of the Baku-Tbilisi passenger railway introduces a powerful new economic and social dimension to regional integration, as well as a lot of customers wanting to use that particular route. At a time when WUF 13 is emphasizing urban connectivity and inclusive regional growth, could enhanced regional mobility gradually contribute to more economically interconnected and politically stable South Caucasus in the years ahead?
Yeah, sure, because we were waiting for a long time for this railway connection to be restored between Baku and Tbilisi. And I think it's one of those important documents which were signed. There were also other documents like important gas supply contract from Azerbaijan to Georgia. But I want to say that our relationship are almost ideal. But there are also some problems, and these problems also need to be addressed between two countries. But I think that everybody knows that this strategic partnership, which is based on what I call it positive interdependence, is contributing not only to the welfare of our two countries, but also to the regional peace, security, and integration.
And what would you say are the two or a few main challenges in regards to the two nations when it comes to the railway pathway that joins Azerbaijan and Georgia?
Excuse me, I'm not. I didn't follow you. What you asked?
You mentioned the challenges that the two countries.
Challenges. Yes, sure. So, for example, this gas agreement which was signed, it's not clear whether Georgia retained two very important components from previous gas agreement, which is, for example, transit fee and the right to purchase additional 500 million cubic meter of gas for optional price, because this document is classified and our government doesn't give any replies to the questions which are posed by experts. Actually, it's interesting that the gas agreement, gas supply agreement with Gazprom is also classified, and classification of such a document is not contributing to better atmosphere and trust. So there are some questions we need to have answers, and besides, also there are some other problems, like, for example, problem of delimitation of state border, problem of trade statistics, which is completely differently demonstrating different figures from Azerbaijan and Georgia. For example, Azerbaijan statistics demonstrate the trade surplus of Azerbaijan, and Georgian statistics demonstrate the surplus of Georgia. So it needs to be clarified what's going on in reality. Plus, for example, it's not clear for experts why trade position 2711, which is about natural gas, in Georgian statistics, it doesn't show any supplies of natural gas from Azerbaijan. So I think that the respective institutions of both countries have to take due attention and address these issues in order to clarify them.
Yes, it seems that they've got quite a few concerns that both countries need to settle in relation to the points that you just raised. Now, as the global energy markets increasingly transition toward renewables, green infrastructure and diversified supply networks, how might Azerbaijan and Georgia adapt their partnership to remain central players within both the evolving global energy landscape and the wider sustainability agenda highlighted during WUF 13?
this is very good question, and I think that Georgia and Azerbaijan can do a lot of very good things in this respect, contributing to the energy sustainability not only of their countries and the region, but also to the energy sustainability of Europe. One of the main projects here is the undersea electric cable project, which will connect the electricity system of Azerbaijan through Georgia with the European market, providing clean energy to Europe from our region. And this is not only economic issue, this also positions better politically both our countries and the South Caucasus as a whole, as a region, in the relationship with the European Union. Plus, the market of the European Union is the most lucrative market in this respect. So we will have a lot of economic benefits and preferences, plus the sustainability of energy sector.
I see. Well, that's a really good point to raise in that. I just want to quickly go to a different topic, but still staying within the sustainability and transport route corridor, that just focusing on the strengthening partnership between Baku and Tbilisi also carries growing geopolitical significance. Could Azerbaijan and Georgia's cooperation emerge as one of the key stabilizing frameworks capable of preserving regional balance within the region and long-term regional resilience?
They are already contributing to that. So we enjoy this relationship based on the principle of a comprehensive strategic partnership during decades. And the foundation was made by two great leaders, Presidents Heydar Aliyev and Eduard Shevardnadze. Since then, strategic partnership of Azerbaijan and Georgia is also contributing to the regional stability, peace, and integration. Plus, we have another very important format. This is a strategic triangle, Turkey, Georgia, Azerbaijan, which enabled us to implement a number of projects which are important not only for our countries and for the region, but far beyond. I mean, like Baku-Tbilisi, Erzurum gas pipeline, which further with the TAP and TANAP pipelines is providing Azerbaijani gas to European market. I think 16 European countries now are enjoying supplies of Azerbaijani gas. Baku-Tbilisi-Ceyhan, which covers 2% of oil consumption, of world oil consumption. Baku-Tbilisi-Kars, which is another important contribution to the middle corridor. And also the important memorandum was signed in Baku these days between Georgian and Azeri governments on the full operationability of this project. So we already have done a lot as two countries and in cooperation with Turkey in strategic this triangle format to contribute to the regional security and economic development. So, and here, but after peace agreement will be signed, and I am sure that it will happen this year between Baku and Yerevan, South Caucasus will gain completely different quality potential to attract investments, develop transport communication potential, trade, and so on. Because this year, I'm very happy that this year will be first one to register trade turnover officially between Azerbaijan and Armenia. These are very good signs.
Yes, well, just on that then, how will the Azerbaijan-Georgia partnership become one of the decisive drivers behind the rise of the Middle Corridor as a viable alternative to traditional Euro-Asian trade routes?
Well, we have already actually created all necessary infrastructure. We have railway connection. Actually, the motorway between Caspian and Black Seas is almost completed. We'll need just maybe a couple of years in order to have the full-fledged highway from Caspian to Black Sea. And I know that our institutions are putting their heads together in order to elaborate best possible custom and border procedures in order to make comfortable business development for cargo owners from the region and beyond. So all these will contribute to the attractiveness of our region and will attract more investments, cargoes, and will contribute to the better welfare and the security of our region and our countries.
Great. Well, so good to have you this morning, Ambassador Lashvili, for your comments there and insights. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Now to the World Urban Forum 13, as we can see the change of background because we are focusing on what's been taking place, and the Africa Affordable Housing Compact brought together governments, investors, financial institutions and international organizations in a coordinated effort to address Africa's deepening house crisis. Participants looked at new financing models and partnership structures to help close a projected $650 billion funding gap in the sector. Experts also presented new ideas for sustainable urban development and better housing policies. The initiative highlighted the continent's affordable housing sector as a growing opportunity for global investors, stressing the need for stronger partnerships.
Well, I think housing is a major issue across Africa. Most of the people in Africa are living in informal settlements and, they have no dignity. And we're now moving to where we're giving women housing not just as a house to sleep in, but making sure that her dignity is restored, she's respected, and our governments are taking it very seriously. Housing for Liberian?
Well, they differ from one country to another because legislative instruments differ from one country to another. So they are not all similar in cases. But there are similarities where, of course, the issue of financing, raising the money for the implementation of the projects becomes different. But then generally in terms of land ownership, we believe that countries are making progress so that investors can access land without going through the trouble of all the trouble that they're going through now. I mean, that's why in the Gambia we've created 3 stages. You have the customary ownership, which is recognized by the state. You have the freehold ownership, which is recognized by the state. And you have the leasehold ownership that's recognized by the state.
It was
an opportunity to present Morocco's experience in developing affordable housing and improving access to housing for the population. As I explained, Morocco has undergone very rapid urbanization over the past 60 years, with the urban population increasing 6-fold. This created major imbalances, including the spread of uninhabitable areas, informal settlements, and growing pressure on infrastructure and housing. To address these challenges, Morocco adopted an integrated approach under the leadership of His Majesty King Mohammed VI to reduce the housing deficit, and it has achieved significant results. To give a few figures, the housing deficit, which stood at 1.2 million housing units at the beginning of the 2000s, has been reduced by 75% over the past 25 years. At the same time, informal settlements have been reduced by 80%. By 2030, ahead of the FIFA World Cup hosted by Morocco, Spain and Portugal, we aim to completely eradicate informal settlements. This progress has been achieved through the mobilization of public funds, the introduction of innovative and adapted financing systems, the involvement of the private sector, and support from banks to improve citizens' access to housing finance. I believe this forum provided an important opportunity to share Morocco's expertise with African countries, and we are ready to support our African partners in reducing their own housing deficits as well.
Today, our role as Kenya was to share our experience in what we are doing on affordable housing. I think our president is a global champion on adequate housing, and he is leading the way. So we are here just to speak to other member states to share our experience on adequate and affordable housing. And that is what we have done. What has Kenya done to be where it is right now? If you remember my closing statement, I said in Kenya, every place is a construction site because there's a need of 250,000 houses annually. How do we achieve that? Kenya has the legal framework that frames on how housing is implemented from the Constitution, from the National Housing Policy, and an Adequate and Affordable Housing Act. Kenya also has an Adequate and Affordable Housing Levy, where Kenyans make contributions so that the country just doesn't rely on the national budget, neither does it just rely on borrowing. You know, borrowing has become a big issue, and many countries are moving away from external funding. So Kenya has mobilized its own funds from its own people to be able to drive the affordable housing agenda.
Staying on this, a panel titled Lachin and Kalbaja from Herbicide and Post-Conflict Reconstruction to Recovery focused on rebuilding and long-term economic activity. Panel leader highlighted that the projects currently being implemented in Kalbaja are not only physical reconstruction efforts, but also aim to restore historical justice and ensure the return of displaced residents to their native lands. The panel stressed that large-scale projects in the region contribute to the development of the Karaba and East Sangazor economic regions.
Post-conflict regions such as Russia.
Now we head over to Turkey, and it has proposed a fuel pipeline project aimed at strengthening energy supply security along NATO's eastern flank. The announcement came during a military exercise as tensions around the Strait of Hormuz continue to raise concern over fuel transport and energy security. Our correspondent Adam Moreau brings us more from Istanbul.
Turkey is putting forward a new energy security proposal for NATO. At a Wednesday press briefing, the Turkish Defense Ministry unveiled its proposal for what it calls a NATO fuel pipeline project, designed to enhance energy security for alliance members on NATO's eastern flank. According to the ministry, the proposed pipeline is aimed at reducing dependence on traditional maritime fuel transport routes. This is especially important now, given ongoing tensions around the Strait of Hormuz, a critical energy choke point linking producers in the Persian Gulf with international markets. Recent hostilities between Iran, Israel, and the United States have increased concerns over the security of energy shipping routes. According to officials, Turkey's pipeline proposal could be carried out faster than alternative options and would be around 5 times more cost-effective. For Ankara, the initiative is part of a broader argument, namely, that Turkey's strategic geography allows it to play a key role in NATO's energy, logistics, and security planning. The timing of the announcement is also significant. The proposal was unveiled on the penultimate day of the FS 2026 joint exercises, one of Turkey's largest combined live-fire military drills, in which NATO allies and partner countries are taking part. The pipeline proposal, therefore, is about more than just energy security. It's also another signal that Turkey hopes to position itself as a key logistics and security hub for NATO at a time of steadily mounting regional volatility. This is Adam Maro for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Now, a Turkish court has annulled the 2023 Leadership Congress of the main opposition Republican People's Party, effectively removing party leader Özgür Özel from his position. The court said on Thursday that the decision was based on procedural irregularities linked to the party congress where Özel was elected in 2023. Opposition party officials rejected the ruling and described it as a judicial intervention in party affairs. Following the decision, the party called an emergency meeting of its senior leadership at its Ankara headquarters.
I'm at headquarters. Our friends are at the headquarters. From here on, we will be at headquarters day and night. We will protect what has been entrusted to us. The delegates who listen to the voice of the street put us here. Only they can remove us.
Time for a quick break. When I return, I'll have a full update of today's leading stories, plus what's making the front pages across the morning. Don't go anywhere. Good morning and welcome to Daybreak. You're watching it live on A News and I'm your host Nadia Jani, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the leading headlines. Mourners gather in Lebanon to bury victims of deadliest Israeli strike since ceasefire began. That killed 14 people this week. The United States is set to deploy an additional 5,000 troops to Poland. And at least 25 people killed in 2 attacks in northern Honduras. Now let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe, and we head first to Deutsche Welle's website in relation to what's going on in Poland, because the US has decided to send 5,000 additional troops to Poland based on what Trump announced on Thursday. Now, President Donald Trump has said that the US will send these additional troops, and it comes a week after the Pentagon actually cancelled a planned deployment of 4,000 troops to the country. Trump wrote on his social website Truth, saying that this decision was based on the US's relationship with the Polish president. Now, the US president did not provide any further details onto whether the additional troops were part of a previous planned deployment or a different operation entirely. Now, the White House has signaled in recent weeks that it intends to reduce its overall troop levels in Europe as part of its American First agenda. Now, earlier in this month, we have reported that the US actually announced it would withdraw 5,000 troops from Germany after a row between German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and Trump over the war in Iran. Now, it's still unclear whether the additional troops for Poland were part of those withdrawing from Germany or a separate group entirely. But as we get more information coming through, we'll definitely provide you with more information and details in relation to this story. Okay, now let's move over to the next story on leading this morning, and that's on the BBC, and that's quite a weird and wacky but very important nonetheless. India has a new political superstar, a cockroach. Why a cockroach, you might ask? Well, Indian politics has acquired an unusual mascot, is what it is, and it's actually a satirical collective that takes inspiration from the insect, stubborn, reviled, and considered indestructible. It has attracted millions of online followers and mainstream media attention in less than a week, and that is because of India's Chief Justice Surya Kant. She allegedly compared unemployed young people drifting towards channels of or subjects of journalism and activism with cockroaches and parasites. He later clarified that he was actually referring specifically to people with fake and bogus degrees. Well, not India's youth has taken that a lot more seriously than what his comments has stated, but by then the comments had already spread widely, triggering outrage, jokes and humorous political idea called the Cockroach Janta Party, or for short, the CJP Party. Now, the parody is of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's Bharatiya Janta Party. Now, the CJP is not a formal political party, but an online movement built around political satire, and it's because what many believed was that the Chief Justice, make sure I got his name, India's Chief Justice Surya Kant was actually saying that, well, what they believed he was saying, that young people are lazy, they're like cockroaches. So they took it to the other level and produced their own party with a leader that looked exactly like what he described, a cockroach. But in order to join this particular party, you don't need to do much. You can just be able to comment, put your comments in any kind of online debate and be part of the party. But that was quite an interesting take on the Chief Justice's words in relation to calling unemployed young people as cockroaches. Okay, now let's move over to our next story this morning, and that's on Reuters, and that's in relation to our leading story this morning in Lebanon, because Lebanese bury victims of the deadliest Israeli strike since the ceasefire began. So mourners gathered in southern Lebanon town on Thursday to bury their loved ones after 14 people were killed by an Israeli attack, which is now being labelled as the deadliest single bombing raid on Lebanon since the announcement of the fragile ceasefire last month. Now, when asked about the strike, the Israeli military told Reuters that it had struck a Hezbollah terrorist in a structure used for military purposes in southern Lebanon, and said that the area had been evacuated of civilians and that precise munitions and aerial surveillance had been used to mitigate harm. What we do know is that Israel has issued orders for people across southern Lebanese towns to leave their homes and head north during the ceasefire because of ongoing attacks there. And we now know that more than 1 million people have been displaced in Lebanon by the evacuation orders. But let's go to this report for more information on this top story.
Tensions remained high after Lebanese health officials reported 14 people were killed on Tuesday in Israeli airstrikes in southern Lebanon, with a health centre also destroyed in Mashuk. The health ministry said the dead in Deir Kanun and Nahar included 4 children and 3 women. On Thursday, mourners gathered to bury the victims of what was described as the deadliest single bombing raid in Lebanon in recent weeks. Dozens attended funerals in the southern town as rescue workers continued searching through the rubble.
We heard about the airstrike and immediately began working to evacuate the wounded and the martyrs. Today, we came to continue searching for the missing. There are 2 or 3 people still missing. The casualties here are 5 children and 3 women. There are many body parts, and their families will identify them through DNA testing.
Following attack, Israel's military said that it had targeted more than 25 sites of Hezbollah infrastructure in southern Lebanon. The attacks came despite a 45-day ceasefire extension announced by the US State Department on May 16th, worsening the humanitarian crisis amid rising casualties and displacement. Fighting has continued despite a US-brokered ceasefire, with each side accusing the other of truce violations. The United Nations also said on Thursday that Israeli settlers carried out at least 49 attacks between May 12th and May 18th.
In just 1 week, between the 12th and the 18th of May, OCHA documented at least 49 attacks by Israeli settlers that caused casualties or damage, including a rise in arson attacks against homes, farmland, vehicles, and a mosque. With this, over 870 settler attacks across more than 220 communities have caused casualties or property damage this year alone.
The ongoing war between Israel and Lebanese armed group Hezbollah is expected to shrink Lebanon's economy by at least 7% this year and could cost the country an estimated $20 billion. According to the Lebanese Health Ministry, more than 3,070 people have been killed in Israeli strikes on Lebanon since March 2nd, when Hezbollah fired on Israel, triggering a new war.
Now, Israeli strikes killed at least 4 people and wounded several others across Gaza on Thursday, the Palestinian News and Information Agency reported. Now, Wafa agency says 3 people were shot dead by Israeli forces in southern Gaza, while another Palestinian was killed in northern Gaza after an Israeli quadcopter drone dropped an explosive device. Several others were wounded in that incident, while a further person was injured in a separate drone strike near a displacement camp in Jabalia. Over to the US, and it says it's increasing its military presence in Poland despite earlier signals of troop reductions in Europe. The announcement comes amid ongoing discussions within NATO over regional security and defense spending.
US President Donald Trump has announced that the United States will send an additional 5,000 troops to Poland, days after the Pentagon delayed a previously planned troop deployment to the country. In a post on Truth Social on Thursday, Trump said the decision followed the election of Polish President Karol Nawrocki and highlighted the relationship between the two leaders. The announcement comes as the Trump administration reviews US troop deployments in Europe under its America First policy. Ahead of a NATO meeting in Sweden, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio said President Trump was very disappointed with allies for refusing to let the US use their bases during the Iran war.
If all these countries around the world agree with us that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon, that this regime is a threat to world peace and security, that already have missiles that can reach Europe. They don't have missiles that can reach America yet, but they have missiles that can reach Europe. We're actually step forward and do something about it, and everyone goes into hiding. Yeah, I think we're very upset about that. The president has made that very clear.
Earlier this month, the Pentagon announced plans to cut the number of US Army Brigade combat teams in Europe from 4 to 3, raising concerns about America's long-term military presence in the region. US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth later said the delay in the Poland deployment was temporary and stressed that Washington remains committed to a strong presence there. It is still unclear whether the additional troops announced by Trump are tied to the delayed deployment or will come from other bases in Europe, including Germany, where the US plans to withdraw 5,000 troops. The move comes amid NATO debates over defense spending, with Trump urging European allies to do more for regional security. Poland, one of NATO's top defence spenders, currently hosts about 10,000 US troops as the war in Ukraine continues.
Now, newly released documents suggest Queen Elizabeth II was keen for Andrew Mountbatten Windsor to take a senior trade envoy role among renewed scrutiny of his tenure. Our correspondent Zainab Faridze has the details from the UK.
Newly released government documents show that Queen Elizabeth II was very keen for her son Andrew Mountbatten Windsor to become Britain's trade envoy in 2000. The files reveal senior officials believed Mountbatten Windsor should take on what was described as a prominent role in the promotion of national interests. After the end of his active naval career, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor served as the UK's Special Representative for International Trade and Investment until 2011, representing Britain on overseas. The documents also contain internal communications about media handling surrounding his trips, including advice on careful and sometimes strict media management. One memo stated that Mountbatten Windsor preferred visiting what were described as more sophisticated countries, while another requested that public golfing events should not be arranged during overseas visits. The release of the files has once again brought attention to the controversies surrounding his time in office. During his years as a trade envoy, Mountbatten Windsor faced criticism over the use of helicopters and expensive travel funded by taxpayers, including claims that some trips were linked to golf-related events. Questions were also raised about his relationships with wealthy international figures and political elites in countries including Kazakhstan, Libya, and Tunisia. The newly released documents also come after renewed scrutiny over Mountbatten Windsor's past links to Jeffrey Epstein. He has repeatedly denied wrongdoing regarding both his business relationships and his role as trade envoy. The government says the documents were released because of exceptional public interests surrounding his former official position. Zainab Faridze, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Now moving over to South America. Violence in Honduras has left 25 people dead, including 6 police officers in 2 separate armed attacks. Authorities say investigations are underway into possible links to organized criminal groups. Here's more.
Gunmen have killed 25 people, including 6 police officers, in 2 separate attacks in Honduras, authorities say, in one of the country's deadliest incidents in recent years. Security Minister Gerson Velasquez said the first attack took place at a plantation in Trujillo, where at least 19 workers were shot dead. He said the toll could rise as some bodies may have been removed before police reached the scene. Officials said the attack is suspected to be linked to an organized criminal group involved in drug trafficking and other illegal activity in the region. There are no arrests either. There are very strong indications that the perpetrators belong to a criminal structure that has been entrenched in that territory for years, that has connections to drug trafficking, and that has also been shifting towards fruit theft and invading some palm-producing farms. In a second incident near the Guatemalan border in Omoa, 6 police officers were killed during an assault on a unit carrying out an anti-gang operation. Security forces have been deployed and investigations are underway into both attacks. Honduras continues to face high levels of violence linked to organized crime, despite recent declines in overall homicide rates.
Now moving across to Central Africa, and a hospital has been attacked in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, where a crowd also set fire to Ebola isolation tents during unrest. The violence broke out after a dispute over the burial of a man suspected of dying from Ebola. Residents gathered outside the facility demanding the release of the body before tensions escalated. Security forces were later deployed as the situation worsened. Health officials say the attack has disrupted Ebola response efforts as the country continues to battle the outbreak. You're watching Daybreak on A News. Now we will take a short break and I'll be returning back with a special guest. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Jani. Now we're going to turn to a global story in relation to the recent visit that Russian President Vladimir Putin did over to meet with Xi Jinping, Chinese leader. Now, he left on Wednesday with declarations of enduring friendship with China and a stack of bilateral agreements. But aside from this public display of friendship and this following on the heels of the Trump visit earlier last week, the two countries failed to reach a breakthrough on the power of the Siberia 2 pipeline in what might be concluded as a setback for Moscow. Now, here to help me dig into the outcomes of the visit is Dmitry Brijzing, a political analyst. Welcome to the program.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
No problem. Firstly, let's talk more about their relationship and the calculated appointment of the two leaders meeting shortly after US President Donald Trump. What does that tell us in regards to their relationship, and what has really affirmed the two leaders' friendship?
In my opinion, of course, the two leaders' friendship is important for both countries on the economic level, and because, of course, Russia and China is cooperating since more cooperating since 2022 after Western countries implemented sanctions on the Russian economy. So now the most important point about Vladimir Putin's visit to China that should not be read as ordinary bilateral meeting. It's a political signal after the visit of the US President Donald Trump. It's also a strategic message to the United States of America and Western countries, and a demonstration of how the center of global diplomacy is shifting. The fact also that is received Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in Beijing within days of each other shows that China is no longer simply one of the poles of the international system. Beijing is increasingly becoming a platform where global reveals come to test their positions, negotiate limits, and demonstrate their relevance. So from Moscow point of view, this is extremely important nowadays, especially because of the Ukrainian crisis. Russia sees that China can speak with Washington and Moscow at the same time without choosing a subordinate role. From the Kremlin, this confirms the emergency of a more complex polycentric world, as the Russian President Vladimir Putin talked about it in his speech with Xi Jinping. And also it's important to have China as kind of mediator between the United States of America and Russia, because China also tried to be actually as a mediator between two countries in order to find a solution for the Ukrainian crisis. And of course, on the economical level, it's also showed that Russia is not internationally isolated. Western countries continue to present Russia as a power under pressure, but as we see, Russia now is trying to build relationship with different countries. So also it's kind of signal to Western countries from the Russian side that the Russian President Vladimir Putin can build relationship with different countries and can visit several countries in order to negotiate about the different economical agreements and trading agreements. So
Yeah.
from this perspective, Russia is trying to show different and send different signals to Western countries.
Yes, thank you very much for that answer. Now I just want to quickly move over to a few deals that were signed. Now there were a few deals that were signed between the two leaders, but as I mentioned in my intro, the Siberia pipeline got very little to no attention. Why do you think no deal was done and Moscow has nothing to show for that?
I think because it's mainly that Russia and China now trying to create kind of a coalition. Of course, the foreign policies of two countries are different, and the interest of both China and Russia, the interests are totally also different regarding their positioning in the world. But Russia now it's facing a huge pressure from the Western countries, especially the Russian economy, and because of also of Ukraine crisis. So the Russian side is trying to find kind of solutions for the economical situation. And also, there is not only we are talking about economy, but also there is kind of cooperation between Russia and China. So Russia needs this cooperation in order to find solution for different, let's say, issues that Russian for military or for Ministry of Defense facing because of the Ukrainian situation. So Russia, by building its relationship with several countries like China and Iran, is increasing its military cooperation and trying to find a solution for the Russian economy because there is negative signals from the economical experts in Russia that the Russian economy could face more
And Mr. Bridgesay,
difficulties after some period of time. So this is kind of also visit of Vladimir Putin to find specific solutions for this situation.
Of course. Thank you for that. Do you think their relationship is balanced? Only because it seems that Russia relies quite heavily on China, especially when it comes to trade. And as a rising power, it seems that Russia is actually looking a little bit lower than how it looks in comparison to China, and especially with trade. How is that relationship? Is it a balanced one? Is this both sides getting an equal weight when it comes to their transactional relationship?
In my opinion, China is getting more benefit in this relationship because China buying the Russian gas from the Siberian pipeline cheaper than it could buy from any other country, and also is benefiting from the Russian resources like grain, etc. So of course, China in this relationship is the most beneficial and is getting more benefits because the Chinese GDP is growing day by day in the Asian region. So and Russia also needs this relationship because the Russian economy, because it's facing huge pressure, it needs to cooperate with several countries and to find new markets. After the closure of the Western markets, now Russia tried to more integrate with Asian countries and work with countries like China, India, Malaysia, Indonesia. So from this perspective, Russia also getting benefits, but China is of course getting more benefits because it's getting different products and also gas from Russian side in a very cheap price comparing what it could get from other countries. So the biggest benefit from this relationship, of course, is on the Chinese side.
Yes, no, it's really interesting. Do you think that Russia could be losing its influence when it comes to its allies across the globe? Obviously, China being one of its closest, but then as you mentioned, it trying to diversify its trade partnerships with other Asian countries. Where else can Russia really have an influence over, what it was in Central Asia? It seems to be losing some form of its influence, especially within the South Caucasus, and the trip route also coming for Yerevan and Baku. How is Russia now deciding on its strategy when it comes to foreign relationships and partnerships?
I think, of course, now the situation is difficult because of the Ukrainian crisis. Russia trying to find on several levels and trying to build a relationship with different countries, that Russia didn't have any relationship before 2022 or didn't have deep relationship. So, of course, because of the situation in Ukraine, Russia also facing huge pressure on the economical level. So to rebuild the relationship with the countries that Russia facing right now, kind of diplomatic problems, it should work more to use its soft power, to use its also trust with these countries and rebuild this trust because as we know now, in the Central Asia, more Asian countries trying to cooperate more with the United States of America than with Russia, because they see the United States of America could give them more benefits on the economical level. And also, of course, with Turkey. Turkey now is a very important country in the region. Its influence is growing day by day, especially with countries that they use to talk in Turkish languages. So the influence also is growing of China in the region because of the growing Chinese economy, especially in the Asian region. But Russia also trying to build this relationship based on multipolar system idea. So Putin always talking about that the world should be not dominated only by the United States of America, and the United States of America should not only have the only influence on the international political system, but also countries like China, Russia, India, and African countries, and that the international political system should build on justice, not on dominating one country, and that country should not use pressure on other countries.
Yes, well, thank you so much for that and for diving a bit deeper into the relationship between the two and which countries are doing what, especially when it comes to further relationships outside of China and Russia. So thank you very much, Mr. Bridgesay, for your time. Great. Well, those are all the stories for this morning. Thank you for joining me for Daybreak. Make sure you stay tuned to A News for a number of updates that are coming throughout the rest of the day. And also because we are at the World Urban Forum and it is the last day, so please make sure you stay tuned as there will be a number of closing ceremonies and key and interesting topics and facts that will be coming out of the forum. Well, I will leave you today and I'll be back next week to take you through your excellent and most number of different stories coming up throughout the week. Stay tuned.